Naomi had lost it all. Famine had driven her from her homeland. Death had stolen her husband and her 2 sons. Imagine the grief, the anguish, the despair. But there was a glimmer of hope for Naomi when she heard that God had provided her people back home with food. The time had come for her to leave Moab and to return home to Bethlehem, bereft without the men in her life. She did have Orpah and Ruth, her 2 daughters-in-law, but she was certain that their future lay in their homeland of Moab. She told them to stay put, encouraging them with the words, "May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me." As they all wept for this loss that was coming their way, Orpah and Ruth declared, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi insisted again that they stay home. "What can I offer you?" Orpah agreed and kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her and declared, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." What a wonderful declaration of loyal friendship Ruth made to Naomi as she clung onto her. Their relationship wasn't solely for comfortable days and easy journeys. Ruth was determined to remain close to Naomi, even though it would mean leaving her home and travelling to a place where everything was unknown and unfamiliar, and she would be an outsider. But this was a cost that Ruth was willing to pay for loyal love. I wonder, when has friendship cost you something? Or perhaps when have you chosen the easy option and let a friend go on alone? Jeremy Taylor, a bishop from the 1600s, said this: "By friendship you mean the greatest love, the greatest usefulness, the most open communication, the noblest sufferings, the severest truth, the heartiest counsel, and the greatest union of minds of which brave men and women are capable." Is that the friendship you know? Is that the friendship you offer? A teacher asked her class to write imaginative definitions of friend. These were the descriptions she received. A friend is a pair of open arms in a society of armless people. A friend is a warm duvet on a cold and frosty night. A friend is a mug of hot coffee on a damp, cloudy day. A friend is a hot bath after you've walked 20 miles on a dusty road. These beautiful metaphors creatively express the intentions that God has for our relationships on earth. For all relationships to flourish, a sacrificial investment is needed from both people. What could God be saying to you about this today? Ruth and Naomi travel home to Bethlehem. But in this culture, the absence of a man in your family left you in trouble. What would they eat? How would they live? But Ruth did not wait for someone to come running to meet the needs of herself and Naomi. She took the initiative to do what was in her control to provide for them. Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favour." When have you taken the initiative to use the abilities and gifts that God has given you to look after yourself and your loved ones? When did you last pick up the phone to call someone rather than wait for someone to call you? When have you stepped up to serve without being asked? I know that God has blessed me with many good people in my life, and I pray that you can say the same. But in life, we need to take personal responsibility for our own choices and actions, and not sit idly by waiting for someone to come and rescue us. God wants to transform us from victims into victors, but that requires active participation from us too. So, encouraged by Naomi, Ruth makes her way to a field. At the time of this story, about 1200 BC, there was no universal credit or food banks, but there was provision for the poor set out in law. It's one of the Levitical laws that offers such wisdom for today. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So initially, we simply see a fulfillment of this law. Ruth is doing what she is entitled to. But this field belongs to Boaz. And in Boaz, we see a wonderfully generous man who doesn't just stick to the letter of the law, he goes far beyond it. In the interaction between Boaz and Ruth, we see kindness in his words, generosity in his giving, and compassion in his living. Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. And don't rebuke her. Boaz's heart was filled with love, in more ways than one, as we will discover. But Boaz longed to meet the needs of Ruth and Naomi. He gave more than was required, because love isn't about doing enough to get by. It's about the overflow of our heart cascading into the world around us. Philosopher Chris Jamie said this: "We live in an age so legalistic, we find it hard to imagine someone wanting to obey their God simply because they love their God." Religion has a tendency to revolve around rigid laws and legalistic rules. Salvation Army is especially good at this. Orders and regulations dictate what is required of us. These teachings were designed to be freeing and liberating, so we can live life in all its fullness. But sometimes they trap us into doing just enough to get by. Consider for a moment. Do you make the lifestyle choices you attribute to your faith because that is what you believe is required of you? Or are they a genuine expression of your love for God and for others? Boaz could have begrudgingly let Ruth glean from his field because that is what he was told to do. But that is such a contrast from the impression I get. This is a man who is joyfully expressing love in word and action. Are you loving towards people because through God's grace you actually love them? A little perplexed, Ruth says to Boaz, "Why have I found such favour in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replies, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." This draws my mind to Galatians 6, verse 7. You will harvest what you plant. We are not people whose lives are dictated by karma, but we do live in a world where every action has a consequence. God calls us to live in such a way that people will ask about him because of our love. there is a challenge for us to become more self-aware and consider what harvest will come from what we are planting today. Whilst Naomi and Ruth are clearly deeply devoted friends, the relationship between Ruth and Boaz reaches a different level. Naomi essentially sets Ruth up on the ultimate blind date. Well, not so blind as they had briefly met. But Naomi says, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Naomi sends Ruth off to Boaz, saying, "When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." What unfolds is a beautiful relationship where both parties recognise the kindness of the other. Boaz expresses gratitude that Ruth hasn't pursued a younger man, and Ruth finds love despite being an outsider in the land of Judah. They go on to have a child together, Obed, who brings joy to Ruth and Boaz, but also to Naomi. The women of her community say to her, "For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given birth." The 4 chapters of the book of Ruth tell of the wonderful power of loyal love. We see the love between Naomi and Ruth, where living in a foreign land is the cost they will pay for loved ones. We see the love between Ruth and Boaz, where they will seek happiness and security for each other, despite their differences in age, cultures, and status. It's a beautiful story. But this beautiful story doesn't end in a tale of love. If you turn to the very first chapter of the New Testament, we read of Ruth and Boaz and Obed. For these characters find their place right in the midst of the family tree of Jesus. There's a part of Boaz's identity that we've not explored yet. In Ruth 2 verse 20, Naomi tells Ruth this: "Boaz is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." A guardian redeemer was a close, influential relative to whom members of the extended family could turn for help, usually when the family line or possessions were in danger of being lost. He was responsible for buying back family land sold during a crisis, buying back enslaved relatives, providing an heir for a dead brother, avenging the killing of a relative, and caring for relatives in difficult circumstances. This is who Boaz was for Naomi and Ruth. But then, from the line of Boaz came the ultimate guardian redeemer of all humanity for all time. The word guardian redeemer finds ultimate fulfillment in the coming of Jesus, who came to buy us back into God's family. When we face losing everything, Jesus redeems us. When we are enslaved in sin, Jesus sets us free. When we can't see a way forward, Jesus gives us a hope and a future. With the knowledge of Christ as our guardian redeemer, how then should we respond? In our lives, we all plant seeds. We plant seeds into the lives of others, into creation, into eternity. The choice is totally down to us about what seeds we sow and what harvest will be reaped in the future, perhaps long after we have gone. When all is said and done, what harvest do you want to leave? May the story of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz inspire you to live in such a way that from your living, all that will be harvested is love. God bless you.